Hi, my name is Michael Chikeen. The smartest people I've met have one common belief, that us silly humans really don't know much. For example, we still don't know why planes stay in the air, or how Tylenol or even gravity works. Yeah, gravity. Look it up. In today's distracted, clickbait, misinformation age, I wish we could all be less certain, more humble, and a lot more curious. Admittedly, I've been known to struggle with all three. So no more, no less, this show is my attempt to be that change. Thanks for joining me, and here we go. Hey everybody, welcome back to No More, No Less. I'm Michael Chikeen, and today in the virtual studio I have with me former professor Ad Vingerhoets. Ad is a psychologist who received his master's degree and doctorate at Tilburg University in the Netherlands. His research has been devoted to stress and emotion in relation to health. His decades of research and expertise include adult crying, the non-expressions of emotions, negative emotions, homesickness, nostalgia, quality of life, and suffering. He's currently affiliated with the Department of Medical and Clinical Psychology and the Center of Research on Psychology in Somatic Diseases at Tilburg University. And he also teaches physical therapists and healthcare psychologists. Ad has written more than 300 articles in national and international journals and books, and is a member of the editorial boards of several international journals. So I'm very excited to discuss everything emotions, and so I hope we can do this without either of us bursting into tears. Ad, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
I'm firstly curious how being a psychologist and how you eventually found your specialty in emotions and crying. How did you end up in that important field?
Well, when I finished my master's, I get a research position in a project on adaptation. It was a very broad term, adaptation. But very soon I discovered that there was a link with the topic stress, which is also about adaptation and especially a lack of capacity to adapt to new situations. And then I also came to realize that emotions played an extremely important role in that process of adaptation. Simple examples are if you are confronted, if you are exposed to a threatening stimulus, it's important to be afraid, to develop fear, which helps you to escape that situation and to avoid that situation in the future. And there are several other examples. Rather new insight is, for example, physical disgust. The things that make us feel disgusting, that are par excellence things where there is an increased risk of being exposed to microorganisms that can threaten our health. Like so you have to think on decaying bodies, bodily fluids and excrements, spoiled food, and so on and so on. So that's important for our physical well-being. And then you have emotions which are more important for our social well-being, especially because we are a social species, so we cannot live alone. We also need to be connected to others, and so it's important that we, in case that we do something wrong, that we can show guilt feelings and that we can show shame, because guilt feelings that makes us try to do our utmost best to do something good, to repair what we have done. And if we feel shame, then we became humble, and others are more inclined to forgive, and we are again welcome in the group. So that are all these emotions, they have their very important functions.
That's really interesting that you arrived here through adaptation. I didn't know that. I'd like to stay on that for just a second more. Um, I would assume that people are more able to adapt in their environment if they're able to accept their emotions. Because I was reading something, and actually in a book you recommended to me, The Weeping Britannia, talking about William James, a British author, and how he was saying that he thinks a lot of people think that we have a stimulus and we feel and then we cry, for an example. Where he was the author was thinking that
just the opposite.
The opposite, right? That we it's a physical response, and then when we accept it, then we can learn, and then we can have the feeling. And maybe I'd love to, if you could speak to a little bit about, adaptation and emotions and how it makes us adapt better. So curious.
Yeah, well, as I said, emotions are helpful in the adaptation to several environments and environmental changes and threats, both real dangers but also social threats, as I gave the examples of, for example, confronted with a tiger, or confronted with because we did something wrong, confronted with the threat of being rejected by others, and that kind of situation, and especially anger. Anger is a very strong signal to others. Stop with doing that. What you are doing. You are. I want that you respect me. For example, I don't want that you bring me in a dangerous situation, and so on. So it's very important to control your environment. So you have, on the one hand, you have emotions which drive you towards something, especially also the positive emotions, of course. So if you see also something that you like very much, and that's positive, the amusement, that then you are attracted. But on the other hand, there are also all kinds of situations with where it's important that you avoid that kind of situations, and emotions are extremely helpful to make the good decisions, which action you will undertake.
And what might some of the risks be if we don't have access to our full emotional spectrum? Because I don't know if you went in this direction, but I seem to think that we have almost two selves, like our emotional self and then our higher level frontal lobe planning thinking self. And it seems like they're almost separate entities, where we need to have one guide the other, where the emotional response comes up and we can't really control it, but then if we accept it, then it seems we're able to plan and make decisions. And so I wonder how that might relate to, let's say, someone who is unable to, maybe has suppressed, or maybe doesn't have access to the full range of their own emotions.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm talking about normal emotions and people who have the normal capacity to regulate their emotions.
Okay.
And so, indeed, I have to agree that many things can go wrong with emotions, and I think that we all know examples of people, especially men, who cannot manage their anger, for example. But in many cases, if that is the case, then there's something wrong with that person. For example, he might have a brain damage, or he might have been suffer, or he might suffer from post-traumatic stress or disorder. But normally speaking, we are the boss over our emotions. We can control our emotions. We are not a passive a victim of our emotions. And that's important to be aware of that. But it's of course more general. You can say that it's extremely important that we understand emotions. And then we're talking actually about emotional intelligence, that you can read the emotions of others, and that you can identify your own emotions, that you are aware of the emotions that you experience, but also that you know that a certain situation can evoke different emotions in different persons. That has also to do with empathy, that I understand that a certain situation can make me happy, but can you make angry?
Right.
And it's also important to be aware of the effects of emotions, for example, on not only on your behavior and your physiological functioning, but also on your cognitions. For example, it has been well established that if you are in a happy state, that's the perfect state for a brainstorm session. If you have to come up with new creative out of the box ideas, then it's very important to be in a positive way. But on the other hand, if you have to reflect on something and unbiased make judgments, then it's important that you are, well, in a depressed is a bit too extreme a term, but at
Right.
least in a low mood, that then you can do that at your best. Then you need.
Interesting. Because I know you've written several books and edited several books, and so do you ever take those into consideration that you try to put yourself in a happier state before you start writing, but then when you enter the editing phase, you're like, I'm gonna listen to the saddest song I can find. Uh,
No, to be honest, I've never done that, but that would be a good idea. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, because I'd like to go back to a second how you mentioned something about control and controlling our emotions, because I know there's a debate out there from people who think we should be more stoic, that some people are too emotional or not emotional enough, and things like that. And I hope you could define for me what you mean by controlling our emotions, because I think you might agree that let's say if we have a close member of the family or friend die, like these, we can't just control our sadness and pretend that it doesn't exist and just go and live our lives and forget that that person meant so much to us. And so I was hoping we could get into your idea of emotional control.
Yeah, first of all, I think it's important to be aware that if we're talking about emotions, that you both have an experience of emotions and you have the expression of emotions, which are also separate things. So I can
Huh.
experience anger, and then I have the possibility, maybe, to express it, but I also can maybe decide to, in a certain situation, to suppress it, because the situation is not the best to express it.
Right.
And that of course holds for all kinds of emotions, and also for sadness, for example, in the workplace, and crying in the workplace. Everybody will understand that an employee will cry when he or she has lost an intimate, or there is a serious illness in the family, or so on. But nevertheless, they can maybe ask to, when that employee has contacts with clients and consumers, that he or she will control his emotions. But at another moment, well, she or he may show it, and then it's accepted. And what we actually also have seen with our crying research is that there's a kind of delayed crying very often. Something happens at school or during our work, and then we control our tears. We suppress them, and then we are at home and we discuss that with our partner or our mother, and then the tears start flowing.
Interesting. Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, your idea that we can control our emotions, it's more just to control them so that we're able to accept them and let them out at the appropriate times, opposed to just letting them wash over us like a tsunami.
Yeah. And this is especially about expression. You can also thinking about trying to diminish the impact of the experience and trying to diminish your experience. For example, there has been a study in the USA where they exposed volunteers to a dramatic movie which displayed all kinds of accidents in a factory or so, and with much blood and severe accidents and so on. And then one group of the subjects was instructed, okay, you see this movie and watch it and experience it as you want to do it. The other was instructed, okay, you will see that movie with accidents and so on, but be aware all this movie is fake. There is no real blood, it's just a tomato sauce or whatever you have. And so that's a certain way to try to diminish your emotional reaction, so that you will not get too emotional. And the third group was instructed, okay, you will see a movie with extreme accidents. Try to suppress the expression. We will make a recording of your face, and we will show that recording to another group, and they may not detect that you are exposed to an emotional situation. So you have two different kinds to diminish the effect on expression. One is by trying to diminish the impact that you have. So the experience of your emotion is lower, and the other is you have a strong experience, but you have to try to suppress the expression. And you see that if you suppress the expression, that has costs, physiological costs. Then you see that there's an increase in heart rate, because it needs energy to suppress this the expression.
Right, and I guess how can we, if you don't mind me asking, like how do we tie all these individual concepts into just how men look at emotions and crying, for example? Because I don't think any men, if they're going through something, want to just hang out at the bar or on the pitch if they're playing sports and just be crying around their friends all the time. But like you said, it's also important for us to have that emotional expression, because it's kind of part of our human experience. And so how can people think of this idea of emotional control, but they can also get the benefits and feel comfortable with mourning or being sad without thinking that they're broken. For example, because this is in the idea of traditional men.
Yeah. Well, that has to do also, I think, with which image you want to display. Right?
Right.
And the culture that you are in, because we should also realize that there is much information in the expression of emotions, what we call social information. If you know what makes me sad, what makes me happy, what makes me angry, then you really know a lot of me. Then you really know who I am,
Hmm.
and well, in most of this information is also reliable and honest information. Generally speaking, you can say that emotions are rather honest expressions, although we have, of course, the possibility to manipulate them a bit and
Right.
to modify the expression. So, and we all know, I think, examples of when we raise children that maybe there can be a situation that we had to laugh, but for educational reasons we rather put on our angry face and said, don't do that ever again.
Right.
And I think that also police officers can do that, and the other way around, in airplanes. People working in airplanes, they also have always to put on a smile, even if they are not happy with certain situations or the behavior of some passengers. So that's what community asks of us, that we can control our emotions, and sometimes that we can, well, put on a different face than that does not correspond with our own feelings. But okay, that's
Right. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most important parts of it, because and something we'll get into shortly is like how important crying is and the reason for it. But if you think that you have to express crying all the time, or be that vulnerable around certain people, I like this idea that you don't actually have to. Like you can only feel free to express and emote around people that you feel safe around, or you can do it in private and you can have that experience with yourself before you go on and live your full life. But it sounds like from what you're saying that the most important part is that we let ourselves experience the full breadth of emotions that we have. Am I interpreting that correctly?
yeah. And of course, there are limits. So if you are suddenly confronted with a very emotional message, so if I receive a telephone call that a child has died, well, of course, at that moment, I think it's not easy to control my emotions. so,
Right.
so, but that are the limits. But
Yeah. It's interesting because I've only had it, I think, once, where someone called me and gave me information of someone close to me passing away unexpectedly, and I just burst into tears, and I never had that overwhelm happen before. But reflecting now, I maybe got off the phone and I sat with myself for only a few minutes and cried a little bit, and then I kind of buttoned up that part of me, thinking like, okay, I guess that's enough. And I think it's really difficult to, especially I'm speak for myself, but I would say for most men, to think to fully accept that, okay, this awful thing has happened. I need to grieve. I think most men, unless it's obviously like a parent or something, but like you really think like you're only allowed a very small amount of tears, and then you have to soldier on, and just live your life because it's not allowed. Have you seen anything like that? Like or am I really just projecting?
Yeah, well, I think that generally there is the idea, what you often hear, crying doesn't help. So doesn't make any sense to cry. Doesn't help you.
Right.
And well, but that's not really the case, I think, especially because we know that crying has a major impact on others, that they are more willing to support us and to provide us with comfort in times that we really need that.
Right. Well, maybe we can get into some of your research then, and discuss where the benefits are in crying, because I know there's even I believe it's a Dutch proverb where it's like joy shared is doubled and sadness shared is halved.
Yeah,
Is that right?
yeah.
And so I'd like to maybe dive in and discuss for the listeners, maybe is there the benefit of crying, and just really dive into the thick of the decades you've spent researching such an important topic.
Yeah, well, I think that one of the most important things that we find out is, well, that might be a surprise to many people, but first I think we did debunk the idea that crying results in catharsis and that makes us feel better. That's a general idea that we read in popular media and so on. But to replace that, more or less, we have found that the impact of crying, especially, can be found in the reactions on the reactions of others to our crying. And so when we show our tears to others, it has a major impact in the sense that their empathy is increased, and that results in a greater willingness to provide support or comfort to us.
Right.
And well, so we often feel better after crying, not because of the act of crying itself, but because of the fact that the crying has released the provision of support in others, and so we feel better because we receive that support.
And what about people that will cry on their own?
Yeah, but what you see is that if people cry on their own, that very often they do not feel better. Well, of course they feel better, but that's more because I think that might be a problem if we invite people into the laboratory and we expose them to a sad movie, and then we measure their mood immediately after the movie, then we see that their mood is lower than before the movie. So exposure to a movie that make them cry, that has a negative effect on mood, and that holds for every subject who has been exposed to a sad movie.
Right.
But then you are in a low mood, and then of course over time you will get back to your baseline level, and that might be experienced as a mood improvement, but actually it is not a mood improvement, but it's simply a return to your baseline level.
That's really interesting, because I'd like to challenge that idea and hear what you have to say, because I had an experience last year that I'll mention in a minute, and I wonder in that experiment if someone comes into just an experiment at a college or university, they're probably in a pretty baseline decent mood, right? Most people, especially at that age, aren't experiencing such loss and heartache, and so if you go in to that experiment, you watch a sad movie, you cry, it seems relatively basic that of course they're going to have a lower mood. But if you have someone that is experiencedly genuine and like powerlessness, loss, grief, and all of these things, that this is why through the centuries so many people have found crying to be cathartic. And and I'll share experience with me. So last year I was going through something, and I was having a period of a couple of weeks where I was really struggling to get my head around a sense of loss that I was going through. And on the recommendation of a friend, I went to see a movie nearby here, and I went late at night, and the movie was super sad, and I wasn't planning on even being in a movie like that. And the movie theater was empty, and I found myself a quarter way through just really starting to cry in the theater, something that I had never ever done. And the movie was gut-wrenching, like Jesus, I couldn't believe how sad this movie was. And halfway through, I was like really full on sobbing, to the fact that like I even started laughing, because I realized if there was even one other person in this theater, I would not be allowing myself to emote like this. And this went on for most of the movie. And then when I walked into the theater, I remember I felt like, I don't know, 1,000 pounds lighter. I felt like I had been on a spa vacation, and on my walk home, like I'd never ever experienced something like that in my entire life. And it was the first time that I really thought like, oh, this is what I've been hearing from my female friends over the years when they're sad and mourning something, of all the benefits they get. And so I wonder how you think about all of these anecdotal evidences to some of these studies that you've tried to do as well.
Yeah, well, at least our findings, as far as they are reliable and valid, they led us to the conclusion that, well, if you cry alone, especially in such a laboratory setting, then, well, yeah, you experience that return to baseline, and that can be misinterpreted as a kind of mood improvement, whereas in some way it's not the case. And so we have also done a Mayo study in which we asked over 5,000 people about their most recent crying episode, and we asked them, how did you feel after that crying compared to before? And exactly 50% of them said that they felt better, 40% said that they did not feel and did not experience any change, and 10% said that they felt worse after the crying episode.
Right.
So then we realized that maybe the original question, does crying bring relief? Is crying beneficial? That's not the good question, but that the better question would be, for whom and in which condition does crying bring relief? And
Right.
so we continued our research by trying out to find factors which determined whether or not experienced mood improvement or not. And then we identified three important factors. First was the mental state of the person. For example, someone who is depressed or suffers from a burnout, he or she will tend to cry more often than the average person, but these people hardly, if ever, will report that they feel better after a crying episode. So that's one thing. The second thing is the specific nature of the antecedent, of the crying antecedent. What was the trigger of your tears? And we made a global distinction between controllable situations like a conflict situation, and an uncontrollable situation like the passing away of a significant other. So that's not a situation that you have can manipulate, that you have any effect on.
Right.
And it appeared that we mainly report that we feel better in the case of controllable situations, but far less in uncontrollable situations. And I think that more or less related to that was a third factor, that is, how do others react to your crying? If they react with understanding and they provide you comfort and support, yeah, of course, then you feel better. But if they become mad at you or they start laughing at you and you feel ashamed or embarrassed,
Right.
well, then you will not experience any beneficial effects of crying.
That's incredible, because I really like this idea of, because I don't like when opinions are polarized, where someone says crying is good and crying is bad, and so then you have two people arguing this thing forever, and it doesn't help anybody. So I really like this concept that there really is scenarios in which it is beneficial, but sometimes we need to realize that, like, perhaps we're pulling on this lever in our life a little bit too often, and that maybe we could do something to improve the situation, or like you said in the scenario of a loved one, perhaps it's just something that's passing through us, and so I can't do anything, but maybe this well of sadness and tears is it's reaching a tipping point, and you need to let it out, to let these things pass.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Right. And that I really like the idea that, like, the 50, 40, and 10% as well, so we can start understanding when it's really beneficial for us, and not. And what are some other things you've learned about crying over the years? Like, is it only humans? I know there's a bit of a debate on this. Is it only humans that are able to shed emotional tears, or because I know animals cry, but I don't know of any of them having, like, liquid.
Yeah. Yeah. Animals with shed tears, if they exist, then it's very exceptional. But there are some interesting observations, and there's also a documentary report about the weeping camel. I can recommend to watch that. It's about a camel who has rejected its offspring, and I think it was a movie who was made in Mongolia, and then the owner of the camel, he hired a kind of healer or shaman, or so, and he did a certain ceremony with singing and so on, and then you see that the camel again accepted the formerly rejected how say that, the young camel.
Right.
He accepted it, and he allowed it to drink from her teeth, and at that moment you see that the mother camel, she starts crying and producing tears. It's a very interesting moment also, because there is a link between drinking from the mother, and production of mother milk, and increase of the hormone oxytocin. That's the hormone, that the love hormone or the binding hormone. And there's also a hypothesis that there's a link between tears and oxytocin. So it's a most interesting observation.
Right.
And now recently there have been a few Japanese studies in which it's claimed that they saw that mice also show more moist eyes in certain conditions, especially when they are reunited with their offspring.
Wow.
And when they are also when there is when they are exposed to pain stimuli. And so, but so that need to be replicated. But for the general ideas is that when we're talking about the crying of animals, and then actually we limit it to mammals, and then that's and then the crying is limited to what we call the distress vocalizations or separation calls. And so you separate the offspring from the mother, and then they start making noises, and that's the animal model of crying. So there are two main differences between mammals and humans. First is that well, except them for maybe these very rare occasions, that humans show tears, and animals and mammals normally spoken not. And in animals, this behavior is mainly limited to infancy, with some exceptions, especially dogs. The dogs
Right.
are a notable exception, whereas humans, we we cry from the cradle to the grave. So,
Right.
although with very important developments also.
Right. It's really interesting, this concept of animals and which animals we have this in common with or not, because from the book you've recommended, Weeping Britannia, there's a chapter that is pretty much devoted to Darwin's role of us thinking that crying and emotions are useless, and the author in that book purports that because after his theory of evolution, and I can't remember what the title of that book was, his second book was about emotions in
Expression
animals
of
and
emotion
humans.
in man. Yeah.
Exactly, and this author Thomas Dixon says that because Darwin was trying to make his case for evolution stronger, he was looking for more commonalities with animals instead of differences, and so he kind of just dismissed the uniqueness of human emotional tears as something that we had adapted from infancy, and it was just completely unnecessary, and that
Yeah.
the only people that cried were savages, children, and women, and that Englishmen don't cry. So like there's so much disagreement within his own work even after that, that it's amazing how much this idea has kind of proliferated over time.
Yeah.
And have you guys ever discussed that this renowned scientist, who I'm also a big fan of, created this unfortunate disconnect for all of us in the 20th and 21st century around tears?
Yeah, it's not only about tears, but in several other respects. I think
Okay.
well, there are several. It's not really woke. It's not what Darwin writes is.
Right. Yeah. There's even to segue for 1 second. There's even conversation with him and like people from the U.S. where they were both very anti-slavery, and they were very progressive for their time towards black people and foreigners. But even in their discussions, they continue to discuss the superiority of Englishmen and white people. In contrast, like it was just a sign of the times that they couldn't even escape it, even if their hearts were in the right place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Yeah, he even writes about the lower species of mankind or something like that.
Right.
That,
Right. And I guess with that said, I'd like to get into something that you and I discussed just before this call about how in society now, and it seems to be a product of the last couple hundred years, that we deem this idea of that person is emotional or too emotional as like this negative connotation. And I know you have an opinion on that, and I'd love to share that.
yeah, well, my general idea is that currently emotions still have a negative reputation, and if you say of someone, if you judge him as emotional, that at the same moment is also a disqualification. Everything he does or what he says that you
Right.
cannot take seriously because he is emotional.
Right.
And whereas, yeah, that's very unfortunate. I think because generally speaking, emotions are very important for us. They direct us in the right direction very often.
Right. Right. And like someone could be emotional, but also a genius, and they could be emotional and also an idiot.
Yeah,
like I
yeah,
like
yeah, sure.
these ideas can stand on their own, and it's not the idea that the emotion inherently makes them wrong.
No, no, that's certainly true. Yeah.
Right. Well, especially considering your idea on adaptability. And how are you seeing this idea of uh, negative emotions come into play on the spectrum? Obviously, we have an idea of, like you said, happiness makes us more creative. Being more sad perhaps makes us more, how do you say, more better to judge and to edit and
Unbiased, yeah,
unbiased.
so protect us against prejudice and so on. Yeah.
Right. And so where did I guess maybe you could speak to some benefits of these negative emotions, especially sadness, that I think a lot of us in 2023 we want to shy away from. If with all the social media stuff, if we think we're sad one day, we think we're depressed. we don't think there's a benefit. You're either happy all the time or you're depressed. There's no in
Yeah.
between.
No, but if you are think for a few moments, then I think then you also realize that we appreciated sadness. Um, Also, the feeling of being sad. Uh, it might be surprising, but if you are in a low mood and you have the choice, now you can either be exposed to happy music that makes you feel happy, or you can be exposed to sad music. Then the great majority of the people, they choose for the sad music. So so and why do we want to pay 15 euro or so to expose ourselves to a sad movie that makes us cry?
Right.
And we also pay 30 euros to go into a roller coaster that makes us so
Terrified.
fearful that we wet our pants. And so so it seems that just the experience of these what we call negative emotions, that we like that if
Right.
if it's in a safe setting, so it's uh,
Right. Well, I can even speak for myself that I think I've been avoiding more negative emotions during my adult life, and I think now the last few years I'm really trying to connect more with myself to feel this full range of emotion, and I feel like I'm more connected to myself and my wants and my needs after that. Because I even have jokes with some friends who, anytime we're on a road trip, they're like, "Okay, Mike, we've had enough of this happy music. We want something a little bit," because I've always liked, like even as a kid, like my default is to be in a decent mood. But I've definitely found really a lot of joy in listening to more like embracing some melancholy sometimes, and some sadder songs, and music that
Nostalgia.
and nostalgia that that maybe was there and I didn't accept, and then I would just go back to whatever. But I can definitely see where this full spectrum, adds to that adaptability in life. I
Yeah.
didn't realize that this idea of nostalgia was so important as well.
Uh, and what's also important, I think that we should know that sadness in some way is the counterpart of love. If we should no, well, not no, counterpart is not. It's the necessary accompaniment of love. If we had no experience with love, then we also should not be sad. So they are connected.
That's
That,
a really big one. I don't even know where to start on that one. Can you please expand?
yeah, well, I think if we didn't know love and had no experience of love, then it is also not possible to experience any sadness, because sadness is nearly always about the loss of something that is very valuable to us.
Right. And so, what about the idea of, let's put this in more an extreme example. Like, let's say there's a child that isn't exposed to any love. Let's say they grew up in an orphanage. Like really, let's try to paint a really extreme picture here. And they were not able to exercise that love emotion for giving or receiving growing up. Um, would that mean maybe their emotional resonance for sadness is also, like, all of their emotions
Yeah,
are diminished?
yeah.
Wow. Okay. And then what could be some consequences in that person's life, and is there a way to get them back to baseline, or like how would someone work with
The,
a
yeah, that,
scenario like that?
yeah. Well, what's very famous are these children in institutes in Romania, and that were very neglected children who didn't receive any positive well, responses or positive treatment from those who took care of them, and that that's a very problematic group of infants, was that.
Hmm.
And yeah, well, there are many attempts to repair that, but that's not very easy, because we know that if there is such a structural neglect, uh, then it may have a major impact also on brain development, so that there may really be well, problematic developmental disturbances, which have
Right.
their origin in yeah, structural brain changes.
Wow. Because I suppose that would mean that when the body normally is trying to tell the brain that we are experiencing elation, sadness, grief, anger, all of these things, it's unable to reach I guess the part of the brain that understands that. Is that right?
Uh, yeah, what do you? Yeah, that you are aware that you're talking
Yeah, because
about aware.
awareness. Because
Yeah.
because I'm trying to get my head around a pretty big topic here, but whereas like if we're cut off from these crucial emotions that the body experiences through instinct, right?
Yeah.
Like sadness, love, all of these things, and if we've quieted that part of the brain so that it's not able to experience those things because
Yeah.
it didn't know what it was growing up, there's no mirroring from parents, etc., then yeah, like does like how do you help someone be able to experience the full range of emotion? Is there any way to do that?
Who, yeah, I'm not a clinical psychologist, so but there are at least all kind of attempts to do that. But it's a very difficult group. We have a label for it, alexithymia. Did you ever hear about that?
Yes, I actually
Yes,
interviewed Ronald Levant that came up with that term.
huh, okay. Well, so that means that you have no words for your feelings.
Right.
So you are not able to identify the specific emotions. You only can experience a very diffuse arousal or so, but you don't know if you are angry or sad or fearful. That you
Right.
are you can do that.
Wow.
And well, that's a condition that also often occurs in response to post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
Uh, but it's also a personality characteristics that, well, for example, men normally score higher on that trait than women.
Right. Wow. Okay. Well, I guess yeah, all this stuff I think is super fascinating for me because with all of the humans, every single person has different biological makeup and genes and epigenetics, but then also a different home environment and people they've met. So like we're all this mix of all these different experiences and genetics that if we start teaching people how to experience their emotions in school, I think we'd probably be much better off as a species than just pretending that they don't exist. So I guess to be respectful of your time, I guess is there anything that you'd like to share with the readers for how maybe they should look at their emotions and something that you've learned that you've taken away from your many decades of amazing research.
Yeah, well, I think that talking about emotions, it's important that if you feel the need to express them, then you just express them, unless there are situations, there are good reasons not to do that. But most problematic for you uh, is it when you have a general tendency to express, to suppress all your emotions and even all your behavioral tendencies, including, for example, well, if you are a gay and you do not conceal your sexual preference and so on, and so that your whole life is well, you have put a brake on your life
Right.
because I told about that experiments where people were asked to suppress the expression of emotion, and then you see that has costs, that has physiological costs. If you have a great tendency, a strong tendency to suppress all negative emotions, then it may have a, a toll on your well-being, even on your physical well-being. But if it's just about crying, how often do we cry? A few times a month at best. If, and if you cry, if you have experience the tendency to cry and you suppress your tears 10 times a year, that will not have any impact on your well-being. I think that's greatly exaggerated. There is a Japanese video fragment where they state that crying is very important in three ways. First, they even recommend that we should cry each week, and if we don't have any reason to cry, that we then have to expose ourselves to a sad movie. So just uh, after your workout, your weekly workout, then you have a crying session because that's important. I don't think that that makes any sense.
Right.
And then the second is that, okay, if you are sad, then you should not suppress your tears. I even do not think that that's important, uh, unless it's part of a greater general tendency to suppress emotions, as I just explained.
Right.
And then third, they also say that crying is a very effective therapy if you are depressed. But in the past, they have developed what they call a crying therapy, and it's on the blacklist of therapies because it's
Hmm.
not proven effective. So
Right.
um,
That
I,
so it sounds like, because that's, man, that's great, because I think it sounds like the hardest part there is knowing when it's something that needs to be let out, that we need to accept, like we discussed at the beginning of this
uh,
call, that until there's that acceptance, then it's hard to really learn from our emotions, and when we just don't need to, like it's just too much, and we can suppress for the right scenario. That seems like the hardest part for any of us.
actually, I think in a way it's rather simple. Why do infants cry? Because they are helpless and they need others. And that's the whole story about crying, also about adult crying.
Right.
And so it's very extremely important to trigger the to connect with other people and to trigger well, social support and the provision of social support and comfort of others.
Right. Do you think there might be any benefit of connecting with ourself, as if it's like another person, so we're not disconnected from
Um,
ourselves?
yeah, yeah. I think that I also might be important. Uh, I think that you mean that, for example, okay, oh, I'm aware of this feeling.
Right.
Huh? Yeah, I once had that experience that I watched a movie and I suddenly started crying, totally unexpected. But then afterwards I realized apparently what this film is about, that is very important for me. I didn't realize that. So it's helpful to know yourself, to learn who you are. Yeah.
Right. So in that scenario, if you would have felt tears and you would have just turned the movie off, or suppressed it, then you might have not have learned
Yeah.
that lesson. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh wow, that's beautiful. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ad, for all of your years of research and spending this hour with me. I appreciate it.
It was a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you for the invitation.
So thanks for listening to No More, No Less. I appreciate the time you spent with me today. So please subscribe and rate the show if you enjoyed it. It'll help me create more amazing content and get that next little bit of validation that I so deeply crave. If you did enjoy it, well, that sucks. But to make sure, I think you should listen to my next 10 episodes and then decide. I mean, come on. Rome was not built in a day. I'm just getting warmed up here, guys. So thanks again. See you next time.